This is my personal framing statement presentation by yours truly, Lucy Slipka. Let's start off with the frames and reframing overview. What are frames? Frames describe ways that people behave. They are heuristic and are not meant to put people in boxes. They do not mean that a person can only act like one single frame in every moment, but people usually have a single frame they prefer the most and a single frame they prefer the least. By understanding the frames, people can better learn how to understand and connect with those around them. There are 4 phrases that were touched on in this class. The first is the political frame, which is represented by the color red and the image of a jungle. People who lead with this frame are often competitive, determined, and purposeful. On a bad day, they can be aggressive, controlling, and overbearing. The second is a symbolic frame, which is represented by the color yellow and the image of a carnival. People who lead with this frame are often sociable, enthusiastic, and dynamic. On a bad day, they can be frantic, indiscreet, and flamboyant. The third is the personal frame, also known as the human resources frame. This is represented by the color green and the image of a family. People who lead with this frame are often caring, patient, and encouraging. On a bad day, they can be stubborn, bland, and docile. The fourth and final frame is structural, which is represented by the color blue and the image of a factory. People who lead with this frame are often precise, questioning, and formal. On a bad day, they can seem stuffy, indecisive, and cold. What benefits do the frame provide? The frames provide a way to better understand the people around us. Not everyone thinks or behaves in the same ways, and these frames attempt to address this by providing examples of how people think. What is the act of reframing? The act of reframing is viewing a situation in a different frame than you are comfortable with to better understand the people around you. For example, let's say Edward leads with blue and Jacob leads with red. Jacob and Edward are on a team together and keep butting heads since Jacob just wants to get the project done, and Edward wants to take his time and triple check to make sure everything is correct. They talk to their professor, Dr. Bella, about their issues, and she recommends that they try to see the situation through the other's eyes. Edward realizes he's been overly meticulous, and Jacob realizes he's been rushing through the project rather than doing his share of the work. Jacob and Edward apologize to each other and are able to finish the project without issues. Now let's move on to what the frames mean to me. I have my own personal frame preferences. I lead mostly with the symbolic frame, but I am also comfortable with the personal frame. I know this because I am very sociable and a bit disorganized like the symbolic frame. I also often think of other people's needs and make sure they are happy and comfortable like the personal frame. My least preferred is a political frame, and I am also not as comfortable with the structural frame. I know this because I am not as decisive, quick, or assertive as others I've met who lead with the political frame. Additionally, sometimes I am a bit too messy and flamboyant for people who lead with the structural frame. My preferences influence how I interact with others. Since I lead with yellow, I often connect better with team members when I'm able to joke around and get more comfortable around them. I usually am the one to create group chats, send messages, and make small talk. However, if I'm unable to connect with my group, or my team members' view of my jokes is off track, I find the group much less enjoyable and sometimes find it harder to complete my work because of this. On the other hand, sometimes I find it easier to make these group connections because I also connect with the green frame. I check in with people who are shyer and make sure everyone's opinions are valued on the team. Oftentimes, people appreciate this and it leads to a stronger team bond. My preferences also influence how I make decisions. A good example of this is with the symbolic frame and structuring my schedule. I get bored easily, and when I have a lot of homework, I have to start early in the day to give myself time to take a variety of breaks when I start getting bored. Indeed, I had to do this with this project. Leading secondly with the green frame has made me a bit of a people pleaser, since I always want others to feel happy and comfortable. Therefore, I sometimes prioritize others' needs over my own, which is something I'm working on remedying. My frames will also impact me in an organizational setting. Being sociable and caring for others will help me make friends and collaborate with people easier in this setting. However, my low attention span and messy tendencies could lead me to get in trouble. It will likely not be a huge issue though, since I am messy in my own home, but not in my workplace, and I have been able to battle my low attention span quite well in school thus far. I do plan on becoming a resident assistant in the future, and I may have to utilize the political frame more often to be assertive in front of my students. Now on to frames for organizational leadership. Frames help a leader better understand an organization because it lets the leader understand people in the team. For example, let's say there's a leader who leads with blue, She is very meticulous and wants to use every moment to be productive and better their product. However, one of her members she oversees starts many off-topic conversations. At first, this really bothers the leader until one day she decides to look at the member through a symbolic frame. She realizes that the member was actually quite productive and was starting these conversations to try to get to know everyone better. She decides to let these conversations continue, and the team becomes closer and more productive. Leadership requires reconciling conflicting opposing frames by finding a compromise that can satisfy both sides. For example, Group A, who leads with the political frame, finds Group B's, people who lead with the personal frame, attempts to make sure everyone's voice is heard as time wasting. Group A figures that if someone has something to say, they should speak up and say it instead of waiting for someone to call on them. The leader bridges this problem by letting group discussions go on independently without prompting to appease Group A, but requiring everyone to write a report after each meeting. This way, if someone was unable to say something in the meeting, they could still ensure their voice is heard, which appeases Group B. Reframing plays into leadership actions and decision-making because a leader does not often lead with the same frame as their subordinates. Sometimes a leader has to settle a dispute between people and they don't lead with either frame. For example, in the previous example, the leader could have led with yellow and had to reframe for both green and red frame. Leaders have to be adept at reframing since they have to change their view quite often. For your personal organizational leadership, what do you think is the most critical frame to focus on and which may be the most difficult? I think the most critical frame to focus on is a structural frame. Most assignments and projects are structured in a blue format, and it often feels easiest to finish assignments in the same format. You can easily make sure everything is completed and organized. The most difficult frame is the political frame. Sometimes people can feel their voices overlooked when a strong, assertive person takes charge, which can make tensions higher. Additionally, sometimes quality is overlooked when deadlines are the highest priority. All in all, I'm glad I learned about these frames since it helps me better understand those around me.